Es gibt heute einen Band im Park. Das macht Spaß. Später werden viele Leute in den Park gehen. Ich frage mich, was ist der Unterschied zwischen im Park und in den Park?
Lass uns darüber reden. Das hier ist Lernen und Fahren. Part 3 of a 4-part series on German case. In the previous 2 videos, we looked at the nominative case and the accusative case. In this video, we're going to tackle the German dative case. This is the ugly one. What is the dative case? It's been said that the accusative case maps to the direct object in an English sentence, and the dative case maps, therefore, to the indirect object. And this is true some of the time, but there are exceptions to this, so don't get too attached to that explanation. The dative case is the most complicated of the 4 cases in German. The bad news is that means it's going to be really hard to master this one. The good news is, the silver lining on this storm cloud, is that if you can master this in the German language, you can master anything that it throws your way. So, let's take a look. Let's start with the easy examples. Let's look at the cases where the dative case does map perfectly to the indirect object in an English language sentence. For example, I'm giving the ball to the dog. Note that in English we use a directional adjective to. There are many directional adjectives in the English language, and when you hear one in an English sentence, it usually means that we're introducing the indirect object of the sentence. So I'm giving the ball to the dog. The dog is neither giving nor is it being given. The dog, in fact, is on the receiving end of that giving. The ball is the person, place, or thing that I am giving. Now, there's a couple ways you can phrase that in English. It's possible in English to drop that directional adjective to and omit it from the sentence. In that case, by convention, the indirect object will precede the direct object. So you can say, I'm giving the dog the ball. It means the same thing as I'm giving the ball to the dog. Let's look at that in German. Ich gebe dem Hund den Ball. So right off the bat, we notice 2 things. Number 1, dem. We have yet another way of saying the. This is the in the sense of singular, dative case, masculine or neuter. What's nice about this is that we don't have to differentiate in the dative case between grammatically masculine nouns and grammatically neuter nouns that are handled exactly the same way. So dem means the in the sense of to the when we use it as an indirect object. So note that there's no to. There's no direct equivalent to the word to in the German translation. We just say, I'm giving the dog the ball, which is how you can say it also in English. But in German, it's more explicit. We don't have to rely on a word order convention. We rely on those articles to tell us dem Hund is the dative object of that sentence, the indirect object, and den Ball. Because den is grammatically masculine, accusative single, we know that it's the direct object of the sentence, regardless of where it shows up in the sentence. Now, the nice thing about that is that we can actually play with the word order more in German than we can in English. In fact, you can say things like dem Hund gebe ich den Ball. That means the same thing. You're just putting more emphasis on whatever you put into position 1. So in this case, dem Hund gebe ich den Ball means something like that dog. That's the dog to whom I am giving the ball. You can say den Ball gebe ich dem Hund. That's putting more emphasis on the ball. The ball, that is the thing that I'm giving to the dog. The word order is less important in German because we have these explicit articles that tell us what case everything is in. We don't do that in English. Remember, in English, the word the doesn't change to tell us what case it's in, or what plurality or grammatical gender or anything like that. But in German, it does. All right, the indefinite article for grammatically masculine and grammatically neuter nouns in the dative case will change from ein to einem. Again, it has a letter M ending. So I'm giving the ball to a dog would be ich gebe einem Hund den Ball. Okay. Not too bad. And if you use an adjective with that, the adjective will take an N or an EN ending depending on spelling. So I'm giving the ball to a small dog would be ich gebe einem kleinen Hund den Ball. And of course, the possessive articles follow the same pattern. Sein becomes seinem, dein becomes deinem. I'm giving our dog the ball would be ich gebe unserem Hund den Ball. Great. But what about grammatically feminine nouns? There's yet another way to say the, and it applies to grammatically feminine nouns, singular, in the dative case. And it is, wait for it, der. Wait, what? No, that cannot be correct. That can't be correct. That must be a joke, right? Der means the in the sense of grammatically singular masculine nouns in the nominative case. How could it possibly also mean the for grammatically singular feminine nouns in the dative case? Well, it just does. The Germans decided to reuse that one for reasons unknown. So I'm giving water to the cat would be ich gebe der Katze Wasser. That sounds wrong because in the previous videos we said quite clearly that the cat is die Katze in German. And yes, it is in the nominative case and also in the accusative case, but in the dative case, die changes to der. Likewise, the indefinite article eine for feminine nouns will change from eine to einer. It gets that R ending. So I'm giving water to a cat would be ich gebe einer Katze Wasser. Adjectives will take the same ending as they do for grammatically masculine or grammatically neuter nouns. In fact, adjectives don't care about the grammatical gender of a noun in the dative case. They're all handled the same. So I'm giving a small cat water would be ich gebe einer kleinen Katze Wasser. I'm giving his small cat water would be ich gebe seiner kleinen Katze Wasser. Now, if that was it, if that was the entire dative case, we'd be done by now. That'd be great. Unfortunately, we have to keep going because there's still more to cover in the dative case. Specifically, we need to talk about dative verbs. What is a dative verb? Well, there are a bunch of verbs in German that require a dative object. That is, they require the object of the verb to be expressed in the dative case, even in cases where in English it seems like it would be the direct object. This is where it starts to get a little confusing. So for example, folgen, to follow. If you want to say, please follow me, you might think it should be, bitte folgen Sie mich, because mich means me in the direct object sense of that word. And it does. But there are two kinds of object pronouns in German. There's the pronouns that are used in the accusative case, and there are the pronouns that are used in the dative case. So please follow me in German would be bitte folgen Sie mir, not bitte folgen Sie mich. That's a little confusing, because if you think of mir as meaning me in the sense of to me, because we're talking about the indirect object in the dative case, right? Well, not always. Let's look at a case where we do. Please give that to me. Bitte geben Sie das mir. Note that there's no direct translation of to in the German sentence, because it's implied by mir. Mir means me in the sense of to me when you use it as the indirect object of a German sentence, so you don't need to explicitly say to. But with dative verbs, it doesn't mean me in the sense of to me, it just means me. So, bitte folgen Sie mir sounds like you're trying to say please follow to me, which doesn't mean anything, but that's not what we're saying. It's please follow me. Mir and mich can mean the same thing in the case of dative verbs, which is confusing. Now, how do you know which verbs are dative verbs and which verbs are non-dative verbs? There is no pattern that I've ever noticed. You just have to memorize these when you come across them. And that's annoying, but it is what it is. But trust me, it gets easier. Vertrauen Sie mir, es wird leichter. Vertrauen Sie mir instead of vertrauen Sie mich, because vertrauen, to trust, is a dative verb. Now, if that was it, if that was the end of the dative case, still wouldn't be too bad, right? A little bit more to memorize, but that's okay. We can work through it. But unfortunately, we're still not done yet. We need to talk some more about prepositions. Now, we mentioned in the last video that there are certain prepositions, a small handful of prepositions in the German language that will always require a accusative object. Für, gegen, ohne, I think there's a couple more. When you use those prepositions, you will always use an accusative object with them. So it's always für mich. You would never say für ich, which is a subject pronoun, or für mir, which is a dative pronoun. Those are both wrong. It's für mich, always. There are also prepositions in the German language that are called dative prepositions. These will always take a dative object. There's more of these than there are of accusative prepositions. There's a bunch of them, in fact. The most common ones you'll encounter are mit, by, nach, von. There's a bunch of them. I'm not going to list every single one. These prepositions will always, always, always take a dative object. So, would you like to play a game with me? Wollen Sie mit mir ein Spiel spielen? It seems like it should be wollen Sie mit mich ein Spiel spielen, because mich means me. Well, mir can also mean me in the case where you're using it with a dative preposition like mit. You will always hear mit mir, you will never hear mit mich. Mit mich is simply wrong. Okay, so that's it. Right now we're done the dative case, right? That's it. No. Sorry, there is still more to learn, because there's a third class of prepositions in German called bidirectional prepositions. And this is where, if I wasn't wearing a helmet, I would start pulling my hair out because it gets really complicated. What's a bidirectional preposition? Well, it's a preposition where the object can either be an accusative object or a dative object, depending on how you use it in the sentence, or more accurately, depending on what you mean. Here's the rule. We're going to go over the rule for bidirectional prepositions. It's not going to seem like it makes a lot of sense at first, but then we're going to go over some examples, and it'll hopefully start to sink in a little bit. Here's the rule for bidirectional prepositions. If you are describing motion, either towards or away from the speaker of the sentence, or towards or away from the direct object of the sentence, you use the accusative case with that preposition. If you are instead describing the relatively static, unmoving location of something relative to, let's say, the direct object of the sentence, you use the dative case. That's a whole lot of words to describe a rule that seems really complicated. Let's break it down with a couple of examples. I'm putting the bottle onto the table. In English, again, you see that directional adjective to, onto the table. That indicates motion. That can indicate that we're introducing the indirect object of the sentence, but it also indicates motion. Something is going away from me, the speaker, towards the direct object, the table. The bottle wasn't there on the table when I started that sentence. It's going to be there because of what I'm doing. I'm putting it onto the table. That's great. But there's a catch in English. In modern English, it has become acceptable to omit that directional adjective in this example. I disagree with this. I think this seems wrong. But you can, in English, say, I'm putting the bottle on the table. It means the same thing now as I'm putting the bottle onto the table, even though you're missing that directional adjective. Now, that might not seem like a big deal, but it can introduce ambiguity in the English language, as we'll see in the next example. Let's finish this example first, though. In German, it's Ich stelle die Flasche auf den Tisch. Den Tisch is accusative case. Why is it accusative case? Because the bottle is moving towards the table. The bottle wasn't already sitting on the table when I started that sentence. It's going to be there as a result of what I'm doing. What if the bottle's already on the table and it's not moving? The bottle is sitting on the table. In English, you wouldn't say the bottle is sitting onto the table. That directional adjective now sounds out of place there. In fact, it's wrong, because you're implying movement where there isn't movement. The bottle's already on the table. It's neither entering the table nor leaving the table, so we don't need the to in there anymore. It's incorrect to include that now. In English, you just say the bottle is sitting on the table or on top of the table. Great. In German, that is, die Flasche sitzt auf dem Tisch. We switch den Tisch accusative to dem Tisch dative. Why? Because the bottle isn't moving relative to the table anymore. So this just means the bottle is sitting on the table. Great. Let's look at a second example. I'm walking into the building. What does that mean in English? I'm entering the building. Great. Again, in modern English, you can omit that to, which seems wrong. You can say I'm walking in the building, and it can mean the same thing as I'm walking into the building, as in I'm entering the building. But that's ambiguous now in English. If I say I'm walking in the building, that can also mean I'm walking in the building. Like I'm already in the building and I'm walking around inside of it. So it becomes ambiguous. I don't know without more context which of those two definitions is meant. So if somebody calls me because I'm supposed to meet them and I'm late, and they say, hey, where are you? And I say, I'm walking in the building, that could either mean I'm at the entrance to the building and I'm coming inside right now, or maybe it's a really big building like a shopping mall or something. I'm already in the building and I'm walking around inside of it. They'd have to ask me a follow-up question to figure out which one of those two I meant. And I'd have to add more words to the sentence in English, like I'm walking around inside of the building, or I am entering the building as we speak. Let's look at it in German. Ich gehe ins Gebäude. What is ins? Contractions work the same way, more or less, in German as they do in English, with the exception that they don't use apostrophes. They just smush words together and hope that you can figure it out. So ins is short for in das. There's a bunch of these contractions in German. Most of them are pretty intuitive. You'll figure them out as you go. Im is short for in dem. Zur is short for zu der, etc., etc. So ich gehe ins Gebäude. Ich gehe in das Gebäude. That's accusative case. That can only mean I am walking into the building. It cannot mean I'm already in the building and walking around inside of it, because I used accusative case there. It's like what we used to do in English, adding that directional adjective to. I'm walking into the building can only mean I'm entering the building. It's only ambiguous in modern English because that dropping that to out of the sentence has become acceptable somehow. In German, if I were to say, ich gehe im Gebäude, I am walking, im is short for in dem, I am walking in the building. Both of those, by the way, translate literally word for word to English as I am walking in the building. Ich gehe ins Gebäude, ich gehe im Gebäude. But they're different cases. And that case difference is what conveys the extra meaning. Specifically, ich gehe im Gebäude can only mean I am already in the building and I'm walking around inside of it. Now, this is good, but it's a double-edged sword. The good news is that you can, once you master this, you can express things very precisely in the German language, and you can remove ambiguity that would be there in the equivalent English sentence, or that might be there in the equivalent English sentence, depending on how you phrase it. That ambiguity goes away because the case system allows us to be very specific about what we mean. The bad news is, especially here, if you make a mistake here, if you are using a bidirectional preposition like in or auf, and you accidentally grab the wrong case for the object, it might not be obvious that you made a mistake, because what you come out with is grammatically and syntactically correct, but it doesn't mean what you intended to say. This is the worst kind of mistake, because it can be really hard for a native speaker to understand what you meant there. If you compare and contrast, in English, if I pick, let's say, the wrong conjugation of a verb, if I say, today I are very happy, okay, two things are immediately clear to a native speaker of English. Number one, that was wrong. Number two, I know what you meant. You meant to say, I am very happy. Great, you picked the wrong conjugation of the verb. Here, in the German sentence, if I pick the wrong case for my bidirectional preposition, it's not necessarily obvious that I made a mistake. I might have meant to say that. Ich gehe ins Gebäude and ich gehe im Gebäude are both grammatically and syntactically correct. They just convey different things. So it's important to learn this and get it down pat, because you need to be able to use it correctly to express things the way you meant to express them. By far the most complicated part of this are the bidirectional prepositions, because you have to remember that rule. If you're describing relative motion, it's accusative. If it's relatively not moving, it's dative. Now when I say motion, that might be a little bit confusing, because when I'm walking, obviously I'm in motion, but that's not what's meant there. When I say in motion relative to the direct object of the sentence, I mean like I'm walking in the building is a bounded area. If I'm entering that area or leaving it, then there's motion involved. But if I'm walking around inside of it, yeah, I'm moving, but I'm not entering or leaving the building. Therefore, it's dative case in German. There's no motion relative like towards or away from the direct object. So that can be tough to remember. And that's dative case in a very brief nutshell. Yes, it's a lot to absorb, but it's not impossible. Keep at it. In the next video, we're going to cover the fourth and final case, which is the genitive case, the possessive case in German. This one's not nearly as bad. So, the good news is, you're through the worst part of this 4-video series.